The rain bled neon across Koreatown streets, and Elena Rodriguez was already 3 steps past him when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the symphony of car horns and karaoke spilling from basement bars. A child crying. Not the bratty wail of a tired toddler, but something raw. Terrified, she stopped, her exhausted body protesting after a double shift, and turned. The boy couldn't have been older than 6. Standing frozen on the corner in a navy designer suit that screamed money. His hands pressed tight over his ears. His whole body rocking as tears carved paths down his face. The crowd, dozens of people, flowed around him like water around a stone, eyes sliding past, as if a traumatized child was just another Tuesday night inconvenience in Manhattan. New York at its finest. See something, ignore something, keep walking. But Elena had never been good at minding her own business. Hey, sweetie. She knelt a respectful distance away, careful not to crowd him, her voice soft. Are you lost? The boy didn't respond. His eyes stayed squeezed shut, his small chest heaving with each shuddering breath. She tried Chinese next. She'd picked up enough working in Koreatown to manage basic phrases, but got nothing. His rocking intensified, his distress climbing like a siren. Then Elena noticed it. The label inside his collar visible when his jacket shifted. Kingyu, Korean characters. Her mind flickered back. Seoul, the special needs school where she'd volunteered. The late night studying Hangul by the light of convenience store signs. The way certain sounds, certain rhythms could cut through the noise of panic. She switched languages. Her voice dropping into the gentle melodic cadence she'd learned worked best with overwhelmed children. Quintana Ando. It's okay. You're safe. The boy's eyes snapped open. Sumaja Chanchani. Let's breathe slowly. Elena demonstrated her hands moving in the calming pattern she'd practiced 100 times in another life. Narangati Hana T set together with me. She watched his small chest stutter, then sink with hers. His hands slowly lowered from his ears. The terror in his dark eyes shifted. Not gone, but less. Ijuno, he whispered, his voice barely cutting through the rain. I'm Siwan. Anyang Juna. Elena felt something loosen in her own chest. Nan and Elena yo. Hello, June. I'm Elena. She didn't see the black SUVs until they were already there. Didn't notice the men in tailored suits moving through the crowd with military precision until a shadow fell across them both. A presence so heavy it made the air feel thick. Elena looked up. The man standing above them seemed to pull darkness around him like a cloak. Sharp, brutal features, ink crawling up his neck from beneath an expensive collar. And eyes. God, those eyes that assessed her with the cold calculation of someone who made life or death decisions before most people had their morning coffee. Behind him, for more men formed a wall of expensive fabric and barely concealed violence. A woman's voice cracked through the tension. Frantic, desperate, she pushed through the wall of security, tears streaming down her face. But Siwan didn't run to her. He looked at Elena, uncertainty flickering in his small face. Elena asked gently, Is that your aunt? Siwan nodded, and only then did he move, though he glanced back at Elena twice as the woman, his aunt, gathered him into her arms. The man with the dangerous eyes hadn't moved. He studied Elena with an intensity that made her skin prickle, his gaze cataloging everything from her worn sneakers to the name tag she'd forgotten to remove from her stained uniform. The silence stretched. Rain drummed against expensive car roofs. You speak Korean. His voice was smoke over gravel, his English perfect but accented. Where did you learn? Elena stood slowly, suddenly aware she was surrounded, but refusing to show the fear threading through her veins. I taught English there for a year. Something shifted in his expression. Not softness, never softness, but a recalibration. He glanced at Siwan, who was still watching Elena even as his aunt held him. Then back at her, Park Jin-hyuk. He didn't offer his hand. It was a statement, not an introduction. He expected her to know the name. She didn't, but she nodded anyway. You calmed him. Not a question. There was something beneath the words. Disbelief, maybe. Wonder even. No one outside family has been able to do that since. He cut himself off, his jaw tightening. Then, what's your name? Elena. Rodriguez. Park Jin-hyuk pulled out his phone, typed something with quick, precise movements, then looked at one of his men. His voice dropped, but she heard it clearly. A command that made her blood run cold. Find everything about her. Where she lives, where she works, who she knows, everything. His eyes returned to Elena, and for the first time since she'd knelt beside that crying child, she felt genuine bone-deep fear. "We'll be in touch, Miss Rodriguez." Then they were gone, disappearing into the rain-soaked night as quickly as they'd materialized, leaving Elena standing alone on the corner, her heart hammering against her ribs. She stood there for a long moment, rain soaking through her jacket. What the hell did I just walk into? Elena made it back to her studio apartment in Queens on autopilot, her mind replaying the encounter on an endless loop. Those eyes, that command, find everything about her. She should have felt good about helping a lost child. She should have gone to bed satisfied that she'd done the right thing. Instead, she triple-checked her locks and Googled Park Jin-hyuk, New York. The results made her stomach drop. Thank you for watching, my loves. If this chapter pulled you into the shadows with me, hit like, subscribe, and tell me your thoughts below. Every comment helps this story reach the people who need it. Rest your heart for now because the next part goes even deeper. And trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. The address Park Jin-hyuk had sent led to a building in Midtown that looked like it could swallow entire fortunes without a trace. Elena stood on the sidewalk for 3 full minutes, her reflection warping in the gleaming glass facade before she forced herself through the revolving doors. The lobby was all marble and cold light. A security guard with an earpiece waved her toward a private elevator without asking her name. They already knew she was coming. The ride to the top floor felt like ascending into thinner air. Her ears popped, her pulse hammered against her throat. When the doors opened, she stepped into a penthouse office where the city noise had been surgically removed, replaced by a silence so complete it felt oppressive, engineered, controlled. The space was vast and minimalist. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of Manhattan that made her feel small, insignificant. And there, silhouetted against all that gray light, stood Park Jin-hyuk behind a desk the size of her entire apartment. He didn't stand, didn't acknowledge her entrance, just watched her walk toward him across what felt like a mile of polished concrete floor, her worn sneakers squeaking softly with each step. Elena's mouth was dry. She could feel his eyes tracking her movement, cataloging every nervous gesture, every tell. She stopped a few feet from the desk, close enough to see the manila folders sitting in its center, far enough to maintain some illusion of safety. His voice cut through the silence like a blade. She sat. Park Jin-hyuk leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. The light behind him made it impossible to read his expression. Ian's mother was my sister. 2 years ago, she was murdered in front of him. The words were clinical, sharp, stripped of everything human. He was 4 years old. He watched her die. Park Jin-hyuk's tone didn't waver. Before that night, he was verbal, social, a bright, happy child who loved to paint and ask questions about everything. After a pause, the first crack in his composure, he stopped speaking to anyone outside immediate family. His therapists call it selective mutism triggered by severe trauma. He has sensory sensitivities, panic attacks, night terrors. He trusts no one. Elena's chest ached. She thought of that little boy rocking on the corner, hands over his ears, drowning in a sea of indifferent strangers. Until you. Park Jin-hyuk's eyes fixed on her now, sharp and assessing. You spoke to him for 3 minutes, and he responded. He laughed. He took your hand. That hasn't happened in 2 years, Miss Rodriguez. He reached forward and opened the folder. Elena's stomach dropped. It was her life. Dissected, laid bare. Her undergraduate transcript from Portland State. Her teaching certification from the Soul program. Copies of her apartment lease, her credit card statements, her mother's death certificate, her student loan balance, $62,000, highlighted in yellow, her mother's medical debt that she'd inherited, $34,000, circled in red. You worked 2 jobs to put yourself through college. Park Jin-hyuk's voice was neutral, reciting facts. You majored in linguistics with a focus on Korean language and culture. After graduation, you taught English in Seoul for 14 months and volunteered at a special needs school on weekends. You returned to New York when your mother was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. She died 6 months later. You've been working double shifts at a Korean fusion restaurant in Koreatown for the past year, barely making rent. Each word was a violation, a scalpel cutting into her privacy. Elena's hands clenched in her lap. Her face felt hot. You had no right. I have every right. He closed the folder. The moment you touched my nephew, you became a person of interest. I protect what's mine, Miss Rodriguez. That requires information. I'm not yours. Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, perhaps. Or recognition of a challenge. Not yet. He slid a document across the desk. I'm offering you a position as Siwen's private caregiver and cultural educator. $30,000 per month, health insurance included, all taxes paid, completely legal employment. Elena stared at the contract without reading it. The numbers didn't compute. It was more money than she'd made in the last 2 years combined. What's the catch? There's always a catch in contracts this generous. You'll live in my townhouse. You'll be available to Siwen whenever he needs you. You'll teach him Korean culture, help him process his trauma, give him the stability he needs. His voice was measured, professional. And in return, your debts disappear. Your mother's medical bills, paid. Your student loans, cleared. You'll have security, purpose, a chance to use your education for something that matters. It sounded too good. Elena had learned young that when something sounded too good to be true, it was usually a trap wrapped in silk. What aren't you telling me? Park Jin-hyuk stood then, moving around the desk with careful, controlled steps. He was taller than she'd realized, broader, and when he leaned against the edge of the desk, she could smell expensive cologne mixed with something darker. Gun oil, maybe. Or just the metallic tang of violence that seemed to follow men like him. My nephew isn't the only one who needs protection, Miss Rodriguez. The people who killed his mother, my sister, they're still out there. They know that Siwen witnessed everything. As long as he exists, as long as he might remember something useful, he's a target. And now, by extension, so are you. The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in. Elena's pulse quickened. You're saying I'm in danger just for helping him. I'm saying you were in danger the moment you showed kindness to a traumatized child on a dark street corner. His voice was gentle but implacable. I can't undo that, but I can offer you protection, safety, a life where you don't have to look over your shoulder every time you leave your apartment. Elena stood abruptly, pacing to the windows, staring down at the city spread below. She could see her neighborhood from here, the cramped streets and old buildings where she'd been barely surviving. The life she'd return to if she walked away. But this man, this offer, it felt like stepping off a cliff into darkness. What if I say no? You're free to leave. He sounded almost sad. I won't stop you, but I can't protect you either. And Siwen, he looked toward the window too, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. He'll retreat back into his silence. You gave him hope, Miss Rodriguez. You gave him a voice. If you disappear now, it might break him completely. It was expertly done. Not a threat, not coercion, just the truth laid out like surgical instruments on a sterile tray. She could walk away and probably survive. But the child would suffer for her choice. And she'd go back to drowning in debt, working double shifts, existing instead of living. Elena turned back to face him. If I agree, what's my life like? Will I be a prisoner in your house? You'll be family. His answer was immediate. Family has responsibilities, but also privileges. Freedom within boundaries. Protection in exchange for loyalty. And Siwen, he'll have someone who understands him, someone who can help him heal. She thought of the boy's eyes when he'd heard Korean, the way his panic had melted into recognition. She thought of her empty bank account, her mother's unpaid bills, the crushing weight of just surviving each day. Then she thought of this man's eyes, cold and calculating, and the violence she sensed coiled beneath his expensive suit. What you're really asking is for me to become complicit in whatever you do. To turn a blind eye to your business in exchange for money and safety. Park Jin-hyuk smiled then, and it transformed his face completely. For a moment, she glimpsed something warmer beneath the ice. Something almost human. I'm asking you to care for a traumatized child, and let me worry about keeping you both safe. Everything else is details. Elena looked down at the contract again. The numbers swam before her eyes. Financial freedom. Purpose. The chance to help a child who needed her. All she had to do was step into a world she didn't understand, trust a man who probably killed people before breakfast, and pretend she didn't see the blood on his hands. She picked up the pen. Park Jin-hyuk's townhouse existed in that rare Manhattan space, where money had bought both luxury and privacy. Elena stood on the front steps, her single suitcase in hand, studying the facade. Brownstone classic on the outside, But the security cameras positioned like watchful eyes and the subtle thickness of what was probably bulletproof glass suggested this wasn't a normal family home. The door opened before she could ring the bell. A woman in her 50s, Korean, with kind eyes and iron posture, bowed slightly. "Miss Rodriguez, I am Mrs. Kim, house manager. Mr. Park is waiting for you." Elena followed her through a foyer that managed to be both elegant and forbidding. The floors were dark wood, polished to a mirror shine. The walls held art that looked original and expensive, but there were no family photos, no personal touches, nothing that suggested warmth or life. Just wealth displayed like armor. Mr. Park appeared at the top of the stairs, descending with quiet grace. In his own space, he seemed less intimidating, more human. He wore jeans and a simple black sweater that probably cost more than Elena's monthly rent, but the casual clothes made him look younger, approachable. "Miss Rodriguez, welcome home." The word hit her strangely. Home. When was the last time anywhere had felt like home? Before her mother's illness, maybe. Before survival became the only priority. "Would you like to see your room first, or meet Siwan?" "Let me see him." The words came out before she'd thought them through. Park Jin-hyuk nodded, approval flickering in his expression. "This way." They walked down a hallway lined with closed doors. Elena caught glimpses of a formal living room, a dining room that could seat 20, spaces designed for entertaining that felt cold and unused. But then Park Jin-hyuk stopped at a door near the back of the house, and everything changed. Inside was chaos. Beautiful, colorful, lived in chaos. Toys scattered across thick rugs. Books in both English and Korean stacked in precarious towers. A child-sized easel with paint still wet on the canvas. And sitting cross-legged on the floor, carefully arranging wooden blocks by color and size, was Siwan. He looked up when they entered, his dark eyes finding Elena immediately. For a moment, he just stared. Then his face transformed. Siwan scrambled to his feet and ran to her, his small arms wrapping around her waist. Elena felt her throat close. She knelt down, bringing herself to his eye level. "Annyeong, Siwan. Hello again. Did you miss me?" His nod was vigorous, and when he smiled, Elena felt something shift in her chest. Something warm and protective and absolutely terrifying. Behind them, Park Jin-hyuk cleared his throat softly. "Siwan, Miss Elena is going to be living with us now. She's going to help take care of you. Is that okay?" Siwan looked between them, processing. Then he took Elena's hand and tugged her toward his toys. "Show you my pictures," he said in careful English. Elena let herself be led, aware of Park Jin-hyuk watching from the doorway. This felt right. Natural. Like something she'd been meant to do all along. Maybe that should have scared her more. The next few hours passed in a blur of introductions and explanations. Mrs. Kim showed Elena to her room on the second floor, spacious and comfortable, with its own bathroom and a view of the small garden behind the house. Soyoung, Park Jin-hyuk's sister, appeared for dinner, elegant and sharp-eyed, studying Elena with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. And throughout it all, Siwan stayed close to Elena's side, as if afraid she might disappear if he let her out of his sight. It wasn't until after dinner, after Siwan had been tucked into bed and the house had settled into evening quiet, that Elena found herself alone with Park Jin-hyuk in his study. The room was lined with books in multiple languages, dominated by a massive desk that suggested serious business was conducted here. He poured himself a whiskey and offered her one. She declined. "We should talk about boundaries," she said, taking a seat across from his desk. "About what my actual job entails." He sipped his drink, studying her over the rim of the glass. "You saw how he responded to you. That's what I need. Someone who can reach him, help him heal, give him stability." "It sounds simple when you say it like that." "Nothing about this is simple, Miss Rodriguez." His voice was quiet, serious. "Siwan has nightmares. He has panic attacks. He goes days sometimes without speaking at all. He's been through trauma that would break most adults." Elena leaned forward. What exactly happened to his mother? Park Jin-hyuk set down his glass, his fingers drumming against the desk. "My sister was supposed to be under protection. We'd received threats, knew there were people who wanted to hurt our family. But someone leaked her location, her routine. She was leaving Siwan's daycare when they found her. The attack was meant to look random. A robbery gone wrong. But I know better." Elena's stomach clenched. "And Siwan saw it happen. He was in the back seat of the car. The attackers didn't know he was there, or they would have killed him too. He watched his mother die and understood enough to stay hidden until the police arrived. For 2 years, Elena had thought she understood trauma. She'd watched her mother waste away from cancer, dealt with the crushing weight of medical debt and impossible choices. But this, the deliberate, targeted murder of a child's mother while he watched, this was something else entirely. He hasn't told anyone what he saw. Even under hypnosis, with child psychologists, he just shuts down. But you think he might talk to me? I think you're the first person outside family he's trusted since that night. Park Jin-hyuk's eyes met hers. I think if anyone can help him process what he experienced, it's you. And if he does remember something useful, if he can identify the attackers. Elena's voice was careful. Then you'll have your revenge. Park Jin-hyuk smiled, and it was sharp as a blade. I'll have justice. Elena spent that first night staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house settling around her. Through the thin walls, she could hear Siwon talking in his sleep, mostly Korean words she couldn't catch. At 3 a.m., she heard Park Jin-hyuk moving through the hallways, checking locks, testing security systems. The sound of a man who never really slept because sleep meant vulnerability. She'd made her choice, signed a contract, taken the money. But lying there in the dark, Elena wondered if she'd just sold her soul or found her purpose. Maybe, in this house where violence and love seemed to exist side by side, they were the same thing. The following weeks fell into a rhythm. Elena arrived each afternoon, and she and Siwon created their own world on the floor of that den. Picture cards, sensory bottles filled with glitter and oil, simple songs in Korean. She learned his triggers. Sudden sounds, unexpected touch, transitions without warning. She learned what soothed him. Deep pressure, repetitive motions, the sound of her voice speaking his mother's language. She learned that he loved the color blue, that he hummed when he felt safe, that his smile, when it finally broke through, was like sunlight after a storm. Nabi, butterfly. He pointed at the picture card, his pronunciation careful. Maya Nabi, that's right, butterfly. Elena clapped softly. Siwon is smart. His smile widened. Then he laughed, a small rusty sound that cut through the afternoon silence like a bell. Soyoung, passing by the doorway, stopped so abruptly she nearly stumbled. Her hand went to her mouth again, and Elena saw tears streaming down her face. That sound, that laugh. It was the sound of life returning to a tomb. Park Jin-hyuk observed from doorways. Elena felt his presence before she saw him. That particular quality of silence that followed him like a shadow. He never interrupted, never spoke, just watched. He spends most of his time here, or in the sensory room. His voice carefully neutral. We've tried everything. Therapists, specialists. He tolerates them, but doesn't respond. Elena studied the room. The bed was made military tight. The toys were organized by size and color. Everything was perfect. Sterile. Where is he now? Downstairs in the den. His expression flickered. Worry maybe. Or resignation. He's been anxious since Park Jin-hyuk told him you were coming. He remembers you. Something warm and painful bloomed in Elena's chest. They found him in a room off the kitchen, sitting on the floor with a pile of wooden blocks untouched beside him. He was rocking slightly, his hands pressed together, his dark eyes fixed on nothing. Elena knelt a few feet away. Hello, Siwon. His rocking stopped. His eyes found hers. Nakiak, do you remember me? She kept her voice soft, musical. Podar, the rainy day? A flicker of recognition, his hands unclenched. Elena reached into her bag and pulled out the drawing she'd made. Stick figures of a woman and a boy, breathing together, numbered 1, 2, 3 in Korean. She'd drawn it on her lunch break using crayons she'd bought at a drugstore. Siwon stared at it. Then slowly, he reached out. His small fingers touched the paper, tracing the figures. That's us, Elena said in Korean. Breathing together. You were very brave. I was scared of the rain. His voice was a whisper, rusty with disuse. I know rain can be scary when you're alone. But you're not alone now. She heard a sharp intake of breath. Soyoung stood in the doorway, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears gleamed in her eyes. Elena's own breath caught. She hadn't made him speak. She'd just given him a reason to want to. The world outside the townhouse had shifted. Elena felt it the moment she stepped onto the street. That prickle of awareness, the sense of being watched. The gilded cage she'd chosen had become a shield, and leaving it meant exposing herself to predators she was only beginning to understand. Marcus drove her everywhere now, to the small Korean market 3 blocks away, where she bought ingredients for Siwon's favorite snacks, to the library, where she checked out picture books in Hangul. Even the short walk from the car to the entrance felt orchestrated, controlled. "Is this really necessary?" she asked him one afternoon, watching him scan the street before opening her door. His expression was kind but immovable. Park doesn't take chances with what matters to him. The words settled in her chest, warm and terrifying. She'd become visible. Park Jin-hyuk's woman, though they'd never discussed labels or definitions. In his world, the kiss had been a declaration, the choice to stay, a vow, and now she wore that visibility like a target. The first real threat came on a Tuesday afternoon at the grocery store. Elena was in the produce section selecting apples for Siwon. He'd eat them if she cut them into precise. No skin when she felt it. That particular quality of attention that made her skin crawl. A man stood too close. Mid-40s expensive suit, smile that didn't reach his eyes. He picked up a melon, examining it with theatrical care while his gaze slid over her like oil. "Beautiful day," he said in accented English. Mandarin, she thought. Or Cantonese. Elena shifted away, her hand tightening on the shopping basket. "Excuse me, you're Elena Rodriguez." His smile widened, showing too many teeth. "You work for Park Jin-hyuk, taking care of his nephew." Her blood iced. Marcus was 2 aisles over, checking the perimeter. She could scream, run, but her body had locked into place. "I don't know what you're talking about. Siwon is a beautiful child." She took a step closer, closing the distance between them, her chin tilted up in defiance. "So, yes, I'm staying, but don't mistake that for acceptance. I'll call you out when you're wrong. I'll fight you when you try to control too much, and I won't pretend that what you do is justifiable just because I care about your family." For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then his hand finally touched her face, his palm cupping her jaw, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met," he said quietly, "or the most foolish, maybe both." His lips found hers, and this kiss was different from the first. Slower, deeper, weighted with the knowledge of what she was choosing, what she was accepting. When they finally pulled apart, Elena's heart was still racing. But the terror had transformed into something else, something darker and more complicated. She'd chosen the cage, and the monster inside it, and God help her. She wasn't sure she'd ever want to leave. Watched Siwon paint with traditional brushes, giggling when the ink splattered. Listened to Soyoung tell stories about their grandmother, her voice warm with memory. Then everything shattered. They were heading back to the car. Siwon chattering happily in Korean when Elena caught the wrongness. A black sedan idling across the street, engine running. 2 men in the museum entrance who'd been watching them too closely. Marcus sensed it a heartbeat later. "Get in the car now." The crack of gunfire was a physical punch to Elena's chest. Time fractured into brutal, crystalline moments. Marcus shoving her and Siwon behind the SUV. Soyoung screaming. The acrid smell of cordite and burning rubber. The sound of bullets punching through metal. Marcus returned fire, his movements efficient and deadly. The younger guards flanked them, weapons drawn, shouting into their radios. More shots. The sedan's windshield exploding. A man dropping to the pavement. Siwon was pressed against Elena's chest, his hands over his ears, his whole body shaking. She covered him with her body, her own terror, a living thing clawing at her throat. Then Marcus had them moving, hustling them into the SUV as tires squealed and more gunfire erupted. The vehicle lurched forward, and Elena caught a glimpse through the rear window. 2 bodies on the pavement, Marcus's jaw set in grim satisfaction, the museum entrance now a war zone. They drove in silence. Siwon had gone completely nonverbal, rocking in Elena's arms. Soyoung was pale as death, tears streaming down her face. Marcus spoke into his phone in low, urgent Korean. "We're 3 minutes out. Secure the perimeter. Get Mr. Park on the line." The townhouse had transformed into a fortress. Men in suits lined the street, weapons visible. Every entrance was guarded. Park Jin-hyuk stood in the foyer like a statue carved from rage. His phone pressed to his ear, his voice dropping commands like guillotine blades. When he saw them, his control cracked. He ended the call and crossed the space in 3 strides. his hands framing Elena's face, his eyes wild. "Are you hurt?" "No, we're okay." But Simon wasn't okay. He'd retreated into himself, nonverbal and trembling. Park Jin-hyuk scooped him up, carrying him upstairs while murmuring soft reassurances in Korean. Elena sank onto the couch, her legs finally giving out. Marcus stood at attention, his face professionally blank despite the blood spattered on his shirt. Not his, she realized. Someone else's. They knew the route, Marcus said quietly when Park Jin-hyuk returned. They knew exactly where we'd be and when. The silence that followed was suffocating. Park Jin-hyuk's eyes skinned the room, calculating. Sweep the house. Every phone, every device, check everyone. His gaze landed on each person present, including Soyoung. "Soyoung, you can't think." Her voice broke. "I don't know what to think. But someone told the Jade Phoenix exactly where my family would be today. The temperature in the room dropped to Arctic, and I will find out who." The search took hours. Instead, she rose and padded downstairs in bare feet. The house was empty except for 2 guards stationed outside. Mrs. Kim had gone to her sister's for the night. Siwon was upstairs, finally sleeping after hours of Elena holding him, singing, promising safety she couldn't guarantee. Elena found herself in Marcus's security office. She didn't know what she was looking for. Comfort, maybe. Evidence that everything was under control. She found something else. It was tucked behind his desk, partially hidden by a loose baseboard. Small, black, high-tech. She recognized it from cop shows, from movies, a listening device, an FBI transmitter, if the tiny embossed letters were accurate. Elena's hands shook as she held it. Marcus, the loyal one, the man who protected her, who'd saved them at the museum. He was a spy. How long? How much had he heard? How much had he reported? Her mind spun with implications. Marcus had been there for everything. Every conversation, every confession, every moment Park Jin-hyuk had let his guard down. She could turn it in, tell Park Jin-hyuk. Watch as his trusted lieutenant was torn apart, or her fingers tightened on the cold metal. This was her escape, her exit. She could take this device, walk out the door, find the nearest FBI field office, trade everything she knew for immunity, for safety, let the good guys take down the monster, go back to her normal life, her safe life, the life where she wasn't washing blood from a killer's hands. Park Jin-hyuk's words echoed in her mind. She could leave. This was the sign, the universe offering her an out. Elena stood there for an eternity, the device growing warm in her palm. She thought of Park Jin-hyuk's kiss, tasting of whiskey and desperation. She thought of his sister's unfinished canvas. She thought of Siwon calling her sons and Meme with trust in his voice. She thought of Soyoung's betrayal, of the devastation on Park Jin-hyuk's face when his sister shattered his world. She thought of the Jade Phoenix threatening a 5-year-old child. She thought of moral lines and impossible choices, and the fact that she'd stopped recognizing herself months ago. Her breath shuddered. Then she dropped the device on the floor. The small crunch of metal and circuits beneath her heel was the loudest sound she'd ever heard. The moral line wasn't just crossed. It was obliterated. She'd just destroyed federal evidence. She'd just become complicit in obstruction of justice. She'd just chosen the monster over the light. Elena ground the device into electronic dust, then swept the pieces into the trash, covered them with paper towels, carried the whole bag outside to the bins. When she came back inside, her hands were steady. The choice was made. She was his now completely. No escape, no redemption, just this dark, impossible love and the family she'd chosen to protect. Dawn came soft and gray. Elena was in the kitchen making coffee. She didn't want. When she heard the vehicle's return, she knew before she saw him. "You've been living in danger. I can give you normal. I can give you safe. I want to stay with Elena." Siwon's voice was getting stronger, more certain. "And uncle, this is my home." The standoff held, tension crackling like electricity. The wedding guests had fallen silent. The guards stood ready. Park Jin-hyuk and this government agent locked in a battle for a child's future. And Elena, standing between them, realized their war wasn't over. It had only just begun. Park Jin-hyuk's grip on her hand was like steel, his knuckles white. His voice, when it finally came, was quiet and lethal. "You'll have to kill me before you take him." Detective Chin's expression hardened. "That can be arranged." The wedding lights swayed in the evening breeze. Siwon pressed closer to Elena, his small body shaking. The black diamond on her finger caught the light, beautiful and dark as the life she'd chosen. She'd washed the blood from a killer's hands. She'd destroyed evidence. She'd crossed every line. And now she'd fight the law itself to keep this family together. "We're not giving him up," Elena said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her. "He stays with us." Detective Chen's eyes moved to her. This black woman in a wedding handbook. This outsider who'd somehow become the center of this criminal family. His expression was almost pitying. "You married into this today. You don't understand what you've become part of. When the arrests come, and they will come, you'll go down with them. Then I go down." Her voice didn't waver. "But he stays here." Park Jin-hyuk's grip on her hand was like steel, his knuckles white with the force of it. His voice, when it finally came, was quiet and absolutely lethal. "You'll have to kill me before you take him." Detective Chen's expression hardened, the sympathetic mask falling away to reveal the steel beneath. "That can be arranged." The wedding lights swayed in the evening breeze, their glow suddenly sinister. Siwon pressed closer to Elena, his small body shaking, his breath coming too fast. The black diamond on her finger caught the light, beautiful and dark as the life she'd chosen, the vows she'd just made. She'd crossed every line that had once defined her. And now she'd fight the law itself. Fight the man who claimed biology as his weapon to keep this family whole. Park Jin-hyuk's hand found her waist, pulling her and Siwon closer, creating a fortress with their bodies. His eyes never left Detective Chen's face, and Elena recognized the look. She'd seen it that night when he'd left to eliminate the Jade Phoenix. Cold, calculating, absolutely merciless. "The courts will decide," Detective Chen said. But there was uncertainty in his voice. Now he was a government agent facing a crime lord on his own territory, surrounded by armed men who would kill on command. "I have legal law." Park Jin-hyuk's voice cut through the garden like a blade. "You think law matters here. You think your papers and your government credentials will protect you if you try to take him. You're threatening an NIS agent. I'm protecting my family." Park Jin-hyuk's voice dropped to something lethal and quiet. "And I will burn this world down before I let you walk out of here with him." Detective Chen's hand moved toward his jacket. For a weapon, for more papers, it didn't matter. Soyoung and 3 other guards had weapons drawn in a heartbeat. The garden transforming from wedding venue to war zone in the space of a breath. "Enough." Elena's voice cut through the tension. She looked at Detective Chen, this man who claimed fatherhood after years of absence. "You want what's best for him? Then look at him. Really look." Detective Chen's eyes moved to Siwon, and something in his expression cracked. He was nonverbal for 2 years. Elena continued, her voice steady, relentless. "He had nightmares every night. He couldn't be touched without panicking. He rocked until his body bruised. He was drowning. And you weren't there. You were doing your job. Your noble, important job." Her voice was acid. "While he was here, learning to speak again, learning to laugh, learning to trust. We gave him that. This family, this criminal, bloodstained, impossible family gave him back his voice." Siwon's hand tightened in hers. "So take your papers," Elena said quietly. "Take your legal standing and your government authority. But know this, if you try to take him, you'll have to tear him from the only home he knows. You'll have to break him all over again. And we will fight you in court, in the streets, with everything we have." The standoff held. The guards, the government agent, the crime lord and his new wife standing between a child and the law that claimed to protect him. Silence. The garden held its breath. "I can't let you just take him," Detective Chen said finally. "But maybe." He looked at Siwon, at the way the child clung to Elena and Park Jin-hyuk, at the family they'd become. "Maybe we can find another way. Monitored visits, conditions, something that gives him stability, but lets me." He swallowed hard. "Lets me know my son." It wasn't surrender. It wasn't victory. It was the razor's edge between 2 impossible choices. Park Jin-hyuk's voice was cold steel. "You will never take him from this house. You will never be alone with him. And if you ever put him at risk again, I will end you. Badge or not." Detective Chen's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Agreed." The guards lowered their weapons. Soyoung holstered her gun, but didn't relax. Siwon looked up at Elena, his eyes huge and frightened. "Do I have to go?" "No, baby." She pulled him into her arms, her voice breaking finally. "You never have to go. This is your home forever." His arms wrapped around her neck, and he pressed his face into her shoulder, his small body shaking with relief. Park Jin-hyuk's hands settled on both of them, heavy and possessive and protective. His eyes met Detective Chin's across the garden, and the message was clear. This is my family. Challenge that again, and law won't save you. The wedding was over. The celebration had died. But Elena stood there in her midnight blue hanbok, holding the child who called her mother, feeling her husband's hand steady against her back, and knew one absolute truth. Their war wasn't over, but they would fight it together. The man, the monster, the woman who'd chosen darkness, and the child, they'd all die to protect forever. If this story pulled you into the shadows with me, hit like, subscribe, and tell me your thoughts below. Rest your heart for now because the next story goes even deeper. And trust me, you won't want to miss what comes. The months that followed Detective Chin's ultimatum transformed the townhouse into something Elena barely recognized. What had once been a home, however unconventional, became a fortress under siege. Security doubled, then tripled. The casual freedom she'd grown to love, those simple walks to the market with Siwon, disappeared behind layers of protection that felt increasingly like prison walls. Park Jin-hyuk worked 18-hour days, his empire demanding constant attention as rival factions sensed weakness in his distraction. The Jade Phoenix had been only the beginning. Word had spread through the underground that the untouchable Park Jin-hyuk had vulnerabilities now. A woman, a child, pressure points that could be exploited. Elena watched him transform before her eyes. The moments of softness, the rare smiles, the quiet conversations over morning coffee, all of it disappeared under the weight of maintaining control. He became harder, more ruthless, making decisions that left blood on his hands and ice in his eyes. She understood why. Every choice was about protecting what mattered most. But understanding didn't make it easier to live with. Siwon felt the change too. His progress, so carefully nurtured, began to stall. The nightmares returned. He stopped speaking Korean, reverting to English only, as if his mother's language had become too painful to use. Elena found him one morning sitting in his closet, rocking himself and humming tunelessly, his small body curved in on itself like a question mark. "Elena," he said when he saw her, his voice small and scared. "Are you going away too?" The question hit her like a physical blow. She knelt beside him in the cramped space, surrounded by his clothes and toys, and the smell of childhood innocence that seemed so out of place in their current reality. "No, baby. I'm not going anywhere. I promise." But promises felt fragile in a world where violence lurked around every corner, where the man she loved made his living from others' fear, where government agents could tear apart families with nothing more than paperwork and badges. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in November. Elena was teaching Siwon basic math, using colored blocks to make the numbers feel like play, when Marcus burst into the room without knocking. His face was pale, his usual composure cracked. "We need to go. Now. No questions, no delays. There's been a leak. They're coming." Elena's blood turned to ice water. She'd lived with this possibility for months, but the reality felt different, sharper, more real than all the contingency plans and escape routes they'd discussed. "Where's Park Jin-hyuk?" she asked, already reaching for Siwon's coat. "Handling it." Marcus was loading weapons with efficient, practiced movements. "My job is to get you and Siwon to safety." Siwon pressed against Elena's side, his small hand fisting in her shirt. His eyes were wide with the particular terror of a child who'd learned too young that safety was always temporary. "It's okay," she told him in Korean, falling back on his mother's language because crisis demanded truth. "We're going on an adventure. Just for a little while." The safe house was a cabin in the Catskills, isolated enough to be invisible, comfortable enough to be livable. Elena had expected something stark and military, but Park Jin-hyuk had prepared for this possibility with his usual attention to detail. The kitchen was stocked. There were books in Korean and English. Siwon's favorite snacks filled the pantry. But comfort couldn't mask the reality of what this was. Exile. Hiding. Running from a life they'd built together because the world outside wouldn't let them exist in peace. The first week passed in careful routine. Elena homeschooled Siwon, teaching him through games and stories. They built snowmen in the yard under Marcus's watchful eye. They cooked together, played together, created a bubble of normalcy inside the larger bubble of isolation. But Elena felt the weight of not knowing. Park Jin-hyuk called once a day, conversations clipped and careful, aware that phones could be monitored despite their encryption. He was handling things. The situation was fluid. Soon, maybe, they could return home. Soon stretched into 2 weeks, then 3. Elena watched Siwon's progress evaporate as the stress of displacement took its toll. He stopped sleeping through the night. He became clingy, afraid to let Elena out of his sight, even to use the bathroom. The careful healing they'd accomplished together unraveled thread by thread. On a particularly dark evening in late November, Elena found herself standing at the cabin's main window, staring out at snow that had begun to fall like white ash across the landscape. Behind her, Siwon was finally sleeping, curled on the couch with his favorite blanket. Marcus sat at the kitchen table, cleaning weapons with meditative precision. "How long?" she asked without turning around. "How long can we live like this?" Marcus looked up from his disassembled pistol. "As long as it takes. Park Jin-hyuk won't bring you back until he's sure it's safe. And if it's never safe? If this is just how our lives are now?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to voice. Elena had chosen this world, but she'd chosen it for Siwon, for the chance to help a damaged child heal. What good was she doing him here, hiding in the mountains while his trauma responses returned stronger than ever? Park Jin-hyuk arrived on a Thursday, appearing at the cabin door like a ghost materializing from the snow. Elena hadn't seen him in 3 weeks, and the change in him was shocking. He'd lost weight. His eyes held a haunted quality she'd never seen before. When he hugged her, she could feel the tension in his body, coiled tight as a spring about to break. "Is it over?" she asked against his shoulder. "For now." His voice was rough with exhaustion. "The immediate threat has been neutralized." Siwon launched himself at Park Jin-hyuk with a joy that was painful to witness. Uncle, you came back. I thought maybe you were gone like Mama." Park Jin-hyuk knelt to catch the small body, and Elena saw his careful control crack for just a moment. When he straightened, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I will never leave you," he promised in Korean. "No matter what happens, I will always come back." The drive back to the city was quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Siwon fell asleep against Elena's shoulder, finally relaxed for the first time in weeks. Park Jin-hyuk drove with one hand, the other resting on Elena's knee, an anchor point in a world that had tilted off its axis. The townhouse felt different when they returned. Cleaner, emptier. Elena noticed immediately that several pieces of art were missing, along with some of the more expensive furniture. It took her a moment to understand. "You liquidated assets. To pay for whatever you did to make the threat go away." Park Jin-hyuk nodded, carrying their bags upstairs. "Some things are more valuable than money, Elena. You and Siwon, you're worth more than everything I own combined." The simplicity of the statement, delivered without drama or flourish, hit her harder than any elaborate declaration of love could have. This man, who'd built an empire on violence and control, had dismantled pieces of it to keep them safe, had chosen them over profit, over power, over everything that had defined his life before they'd entered it. That night, after Siwon was safely tucked into his own bed for the first time in weeks, Elena found Park Jin-hyuk in his study. He was staring at the empty spaces where his most prized possessions had once been displayed, his expression unreadable. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Any of it? Choosing us over everything else?" He turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw exhaustion and determination and something deeper. Something that looked like peace. Before him, I was building toward nothing. An empire for the sake of having an empire. Power for the sake of control. It was empty, Elena. Beautiful and terrible and completely empty. He crossed to where she stood, his hands framing her face with a gentleness that still surprised her. "You gave me purpose. Both of you. A reason for all of it to exist. So no, I don't regret choosing you. I only regret that the choice had to cost so much." Elena leaned into his touch, feeling the weight of the past months settling between them. They'd survived, all 3 of them, together. But survival had changed them, marked them, taught them hard lessons about the price of love in a world that didn't make room for families like theirs. "We can't keep living like this," she said quietly. "Always running, always afraid. It's not fair to Siwon, and it's killing you slowly." "What are you suggesting?" I don't know yet. But there has to be another way. Some middle ground between total isolation and constant danger. Park Jin-hyuk smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it reached his eyes. You sound like you're planning something dangerous. Elena smiled back, feeling something like hope stirring in her chest. Maybe I am. We've been playing defense this whole time. Maybe it's time to change the game. The plan, when it finally crystallized, was audacious in its simplicity. Instead of hiding from the scrutiny of law enforcement and rival criminals, they would step into the light, become visible, legitimate, untouchable through transparency rather than secrecy. Park Jin-hyuk would transition his operations, slowly and carefully, into legal enterprises. The process would take years, but he had contacts, resources, and most importantly, information that could prove valuable to the right people in government. A controlled burn of his criminal empire in exchange for protection, immunity, and the chance to build something clean. Elena would spearhead a foundation focused on helping trauma survivors, particularly children who'd witnessed violence. Her background in special needs education, combined with her experience with Siwon, made her uniquely qualified. More importantly, it would give their family a public face, a legitimate reason for existing in the world. The execution required delicate negotiations, careful timing, and more trust than Elena had ever placed in bureaucracy and legal systems. But Detective Chun, surprisingly, became an ally. His genuine concern for Siwon's welfare, combined with his access to FBI resources, created opportunities they wouldn't have had otherwise. The foundation launched on a spring morning exactly 1 year after Elena had first encountered Siwon on that rainy street corner. The press conference was small, carefully managed, but the message was clear. Park Jin-hyuk, formerly one of the city's most notorious crime figures, was dedicating his life to helping other families heal from trauma. Elena stood beside him at the podium, Siwon between them, all three of them wearing matching smiles that felt real for the first time in months. The questions from reporters were predictable, some hostile, others cautiously optimistic. But what mattered was that they were standing there together, in the open, claiming their right to exist as a family. Siwon had insisted on speaking, his small voice clear and confident as he addressed the crowd in both English and Korean. He talked about losing his mother, about the nightmares, about learning to trust again. He called Elena his second mother and Park Jin-hyuk his protector uncle, describing their family with the straightforward honesty that only children possess. When it was over, when the cameras had stopped rolling and the reporters had filed their stories, the three of them stood together in the empty conference room. They'd done it, stepped out of the shadows and into a future they'd built together from impossible choices and unconventional love. Later that evening, as Elena tucked Siwon into bed in the townhouse that finally felt like home again, he looked up at her with serious dark eyes. "Elena," he said carefully, "are we going to be okay now? Really okay?" She smoothed his hair back from his forehead. This child who'd survived more trauma than most adults ever faced, who'd learned to love again despite every reason to stay closed off and protected. "Yes, baby. We're going to be okay. All of us, together." And for the first time since she'd knelt beside a crying child on a neon-lit street corner, Elena believed it completely. They'd chosen each other across every boundary that should have kept them apart. They'd fought for their right to be a family against forces that wanted to tear them apart. They'd survived dangers and emerged stronger, more committed, more certain of what mattered most. Outside, the city continued its endless dance of light and shadow, but inside the townhouse, three people who'd found each other against all odds settled into the peaceful rhythm of home. The monster had learned to love. The woman had learned to fight. The child had learned to trust again. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. If this story found its way into your heart, hit like, subscribe, and tell me what you thought. Sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones that shouldn't exist, but choose to love anyway. Sweet dreams. And remember that home isn't a place. It's the people who refuse to let you go.